Good morning, and to those of you joining online, perhaps good afternoon and good evening. May I extend a very warm welcome back to everyone to the second day of the Nature-Based Solutions Conference 2022. So yesterday, we explored how nature-based solutions are very much place-based partnerships between people and nature that are underpinned by biodiversity and implemented by, for, in close partnership with Indigenous peoples and local communities. When well designed and carefully implemented, following the science, following the local knowledge, nature-based solutions can bring multiple benefits. Though as we heard yesterday, particularly in the final session, the extent to which they can be deployed depends on biophysical potential and land availability. And we discussed that it also depends very much on our role of a wide variety of institutional and socio-political and cultural factors or societal enablers that influence the upkeep and implementation of nature-based solutions over time. And these enablers include good governance, secure land tenure, sustainable livelihoods, ethical and sustainable finance, and nature-positive values in society in general. But these issues are all going to be discussed. These are major themes of today's talks. But also, as discussed yesterday, and we're going to keep saying this, nature-based solutions absolutely must be implemented in tandem with rapid reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. Otherwise, the warming that will result from high and increasing emissions will turn the biosphere into a net source of greenhouse gas emissions through increased frequency and/or intensity of fires, extreme events, pests, and so forth. However, we will also learn today, we had some insights yesterday in session 2, but we'll talk more today about how some of those impacts can actually be reduced if we carefully and adaptively manage our landscapes and our nature-based solutions. We're going to be taking a much deeper look at the relationship between people and nature and the outcomes for biodiversity and ecosystem health in general of nature-based solutions, whether implemented for the goals of food security, climate change adaptation, or mitigation. We have to bear in mind the health of the ecosystems at their core. And we will also, in the final session today, discuss how to ensure sustainable flows of finance to the projects that need it most. So just very much in brief, the first session of the day, after the coffee break, will explore the serious concerns from the Indigenous people and local community groups across the world that often projects badged as nature-based solutions are top-down and externally imposed concept that commodifies nature and traditional practice and brings serious risks to the rights and livelihoods, despite all the evidence that nature-based solutions can actually bring benefits to local communities. And so speakers are going to explore how we ensure we deal with that very serious concern moving forward. We have got case studies from different parts of the world and voices from different parts of the world and projects. After lunch, session 5A, which is going to be held in this lecture theatre. So we need to remember that today we have parité and tomorrow we have parallel sessions. So the one after lunch on biodiversity is going to be really exploring evidence for the outcomes for biodiversity and ecosystem health of nature-based solutions, and it will explore the ways in which research practice and policy communities can work together to improve the design and monitoring and management of nature-based solutions so that they can develop produce clear benefits for biodiversity and ecosystem health alongside climate goals. And then we've got in session 5, at the same time, 5B at the same time, parallel session in the Oxford Martin School. So you need to sign up for that if you haven't already done so, as seating is limited to only 120 people. It will explore different perspectives of the meaning of inclusive and restorative governance in the context of nature-based solutions and land use change. In the late afternoon, from 4:30 to 6:30, another parallel session for which you will need to book in at the Oxford Martin School, which is focused on understanding and how we overcome obstacles to implementing nature-based solutions. Explore when and where and why projects fail to deliver for people, for biodiversity or climate, and how we overcome those challenges. And then the final session, at the same time here in the Natural History Museum, 6B asks, how can we secure sustainable, ethical flows of finance to the people and the projects that need it most? Okay, so now I would like to introduce what's going to happen in this particular keynote session. So we're going to have a short film and 3 keynote speakers. Now, those of you who have spent time in Amazonia, especially if you are natural historians or bird watchers in particular, you may recognize that many of the natural sounds that we have been playing as part of this conference online and as you enter the building come from that region. Home to the Earth's greatest reservoir of biodiversity and a great many indigenous communities, the importance of Amazonia cannot be exaggerated. So we're starting the second day with a bit of a focus on that region. First, we will have a video about the Amazon Sacred Headwaters Initiative, and then we will have a video message from Gregorio Mirabal, then a remote presentation from Mark Palahi, and finally, we hope, a remote presentation from Belén Paez. But although she is dialing in from the middle of the Ecuadorian Amazon and the Wi-Fi connection is not the best, so we're hoping she can join us, but if she doesn't, we will have some Q&A after Mark's presentation. So let me introduce these wonderful speakers first of all. Gregorio Mirabal is member of the Curupaco Indigenous Peoples from Venezuela, a member of the Council of the FSC Indigenous Foundation and General Coordination of the indigenous organizations of the Amazon Basin, or COICA, and an indigenous leader committed to the defense of the rights of indigenous peoples. So he was Vice President of the Indigenous Parliament of America chapter on Venezuela, General Coordinator of the Organization of Indigenous Peoples of the Amazon, as I've said, and a member of different UN conferences of the parties, including the CBD and the UNFCCC. It's wonderful that he's been able to find the time in his very, very busy and important role to prepare that video for us to show you today. Mark, meanwhile, is a leading expert on forests and global change who is very passionate, as you will discover, about, if you didn't know already, about transformational role forests can play in fighting climate change and, in particular, developing a circular bioeconomy. So he has been director of the European Forestry Institute since 2015, driving its development as a pan-European science policy platform and working to connect knowledge to action at the interface of science policy and business. He has a PhD in forestry and economics, and his work focuses on the development of a sustainable circular bioeconomy that prospers in harmony with nature, and he's going to tell us all about that shortly. And Belén has kindly stepped in to replace Atossa Soltani, who couldn't travel to be with us because she contracted COVID. So she is actually still quite poorly and so unable to join us in person, which had been the original plan. But Belén Paez, it's wonderful that she's able to step in, we hope. She is the former president of the Fundación Pachamama and is currently on the secretariat of the Amazon Headwaters Sacred Initiative. She is an incredible person, also an ecologist and an environmental leader who's devoted nearly 20 years of her life to the conservation of the Amazon rainforest and the protection of the rights of indigenous peoples in the Andes and the Amazon region of Ecuador.
The Ecuadorian Amazon is currently a hugely valuable carbon sink, sucking up more carbon dioxide than it emits. But human activity has scarred and drained the land, stripping it for resources.
¿Por qué estamos luchando? Porque si nuestra lucha también es para el beneficio de toda la humanidad. Hay que dialogar para poder cuidar de nuestra casa grande, que es el planeta.
But it's no longer just about protecting this forest, it's about learning from it. In 2022, a group called the Circular Bioeconomy Alliance ventured to the sacred headwaters of the Amazon River in Ecuador. The Alliance are trying to change the way the world thinks about our environment, both within the Amazon forest and around the world.
The Prince of Wales established the Circular Bioeconomy Alliance to connect finance to action on the ground. It is formed by a diverse partnership that involves indigenous communities, NGOs, scientific organizations, companies, banks, funds, but all sharing the same vision that we need to develop a new economy that prospers in harmony with nature.
Estamos invitando al mundo que hagamos una alianza una alianza verdadera para dar segundo paso.
The alliance was created because we have reached a tipping point. We are now in the Amazon in order to see how for thousands of years the indigenous communities have been already implementing a living economy that should inspire the new economy of the 21st century, the bioeconomy.
Hemos aprendido sobre todo cómo cuidar de la naturaleza, sin destruir. Aquí hemos vivido muchos años, siglos de años, pero no hemos destruido. La naturaleza está en equilibrio.
La selva o la madre tierra que llamemos es parte del ser humano. Ya nosotros somos parte de la selva. La alianza de bioeconomía circular es sumamente importante porque el propósito de este trabajo es mantener intacto lo que es la Amazonía y también lo que es la cultura y los pueblos indígenas.
Of course, we need to admit that it's difficult to replicate the circular bioeconomy that the indigenous communities implement in the Amazon to other parts of the world. But what we can replicate is some of the principles they use to develop this circular bioeconomy.
We need to work with the indigenous people because they have the knowledge and they have the intimacy with their forest. So it's their project, but we are here to provide support. And the first type of support we can provide is identifying the value chains. We need a market. It can be a local market, it can be a global market. But then we can help as well on how to scale reforestation. Starting from a small project to a large project is not easy. You need logistics, you need to contract with the villagers, and you need the communication tools as well. So we provide this technical expertise, and we have also the network of companies that can buy their product.
Banks and funds play a crucial role. Without the investors and the banks providing the capital, deploying the right amount of capital to make this transformation, it will not be possible. They need to start recognizing and valuing nature as the basis for any sustainable economy for the future.
Entonces hemos pensado y hemos definido que no queremos ser millonario, capitalismo grande, más bien queremos vida digna, vida sana, alegría, aire puro, limpio y que la generación goce la vida igual como hemos gozado nosotros durante nuestra niñez. Cuando hablamos del problema mundial del cambio climático, tenemos que sentar y abrir nuevo camino. Ese nuevo camino es entre todos. A todos los banqueros, los que invirtieron al petróleo para extraer petróleo, pero han contaminado tanto, invito que ahora inviertan para restauración, para reforestación, para la limpieza de los ríos contaminados y inviertan para la selva, que es la vida de la humanidad.
My name is Gregorio Mirabal of the Wakanai Curipaco community of the Venezuelan Amazon. I'd like to say hello to everybody here participating in this important space of analysis and contributions to help the planet. The Amazon, our Amazon, is the largest tropical rainforest on the planet and with the largest biocultural diversity in the world. It is home to a third of the plant and animal species in the world, and it's where more than 500 indigenous communities live. The river system of the Amazon River produces 20% of the world's freshwater discharge. It sequesters and stores 73 to 100 billion tons of carbon. These unique characteristics mean that it works as the biological heart of our planet and that it's the main regulator of the climate in the world and our home. In this context, the more than 500 indigenous communities that live in the countries in the Amazon basin, Brazil, Colombia, Guyana, French Guiana, Ecuador, Venezuela, Peru, Suriname, and Bolivia, fulfill an essential role because we've been the historical defenders of these territories. According to you, the scientists, it's been shown that the best conserved areas and with the least environmental damages are those in the indigenous territories. So it has been demonstrated that the high degradation and deforestation occurs mainly outside of the territories, indigenous territories and the protected areas. And this happens because our community, culturally and ancestrally, has been maintaining the same world vision. We understand that without the rainforest, without the land, without water or the air, there is no life. Understanding the deep connection between the ecosystems, the biodiversity, and the existence of humanity is key. And that's why our story reflects the resistance to the ongoing exploitation and degradation of the Amazon and the constant fight against the senseless destruction that is today referred to as so-called development. So we can't talk about nature-based solutions without talking about our knowledge, our wisdom, our commitment to giving our lives to the Amazon so that it is in the condition that we see it in at the moment. And it's therefore once again important to include our knowledge, our work, our struggle to protect the Amazon and the environment across the world. Because we've shown that we are the ones who live in harmony with the rainforest and with nature. However, this defense of life, of territories, of water and the air has led to constant deaths within our community. Indigenous defenders are constantly being murdered by armed groups, criminals, drug traffickers, illegal miners, and exploitation and extraction in our territory is a constant. According to Global Forest Watch, this year, it has been shown that the most dangerous countries in the world with the highest levels of deforestation in the world are precisely in the Amazon. The most dangerous countries where most of our brothers have been murdered are in the Amazon. These are the indigenous communities that are being constantly threatened. But unfortunately, more than 263 murders have already occurred. Even just a few hours ago, one of our brothers was murdered, and most are murdered in the Colombian, Brazilian, Peruvian, and Bolivian Amazon, and just recently in the Venezuelan Amazon. 77% of the cases take place in this region. We would like to honour Virgilio Trujillo Arana in this space, who was murdered just a few hours ago for defending life and for defending territories. We don't want his murder to go unpunished, as in the case of all of the other murders of defenders of the rights of indigenous communities, not just of Venezuela, but also of the whole Amazon basin. There is impunity on the part of the laws, the governors, our peoples, and our countries. And most don't want to ratify the Escazú Agreement, the first binding legal instrument that aims to guarantee the rights of indigenous defenders. It must be implemented because all of the agents are united in safeguarding the lives of indigenous communities. That's what we want, and in doing so, we're saving the largest rainforest in the world and protecting all forms of life in the Amazon. The Escazú Agreement is the only environmental treaty that also protects the rights of environmental defenders. It was signed recently in Chile by 24 Latin American and Caribbean countries. Meanwhile, the effects and the threats are increasing every second in our territory, leading to our rainforest, our region, to a point of no return. Scientific consensus established the point of no return for the Amazon within a range of 20 to 25% of deforestation and forest degradation combined. Data shows that 22% of the Amazon is in a state of advanced damage. Forest degradation, recurring forest fires, and reforestation. We are not projecting a future scenario here. We're living under constant destruction in the region, with negative implications on a worldwide scale for climate stability. The horizon proposed for reaching global conservation targets in the world is 2030. In 8 years, it's possible that the Amazon may not exist as we know it today. Given this scenario, the indigenous communities hope to act in worldwide and territorial alliance to protect and to defend our Amazon rainforest and to keep it living, keep it breathing, and keep it walking. We need its air, water, medicine, and food. We need its spiritual force and energy, and that is what the territory can guarantee. This will only be possible with unity, respect, and the inclusion of all wisdom, technologies, and knowledge at the same table on an equal plane. Respect our knowledge and our struggle. We at KOICA are right now and in this moment calling for a global agreement for the permanent protection of 80% of the Amazon rainforest by 2025 as a first phase, agreed upon by all governments in the Amazon and backed by indigenous communities and the worldwide community. This was approved in Marseille under Motion 129 last year at the IUCN World Conservation Congress, and in a country which has been supporting this, France, as an urgent response to the current civil emergency. This is our proposal, this is our demand, and to achieve it we need legal security in our territories and we need our lives to be guaranteed and protected. We need to see recognition of our right to free, prior and informed consent, and we need protection and respect for the system of knowledge of the indigenous communities as solutions that we've been providing over thousands of years. We need to see an end to the violence, criminalisation, murders and systematic threats against indigenous defenders. We need direct financing for the communities with permanent technical support in terms of human resources and financial resources. The UN and experts on climate and biodiversity have also started to vouch for expanding the rights of indigenous communities and local communities and to make the most of their traditional knowledge as a proven solution over thousands of years to protect the ecosystems and keep them intact. We should be receiving direct financing to defend the Amazon, for our key role in defending the Amazon. Doing this would not only save lives, but the life of our planet. It would stop deforestation, which is increasing the climate chaos, leading to the loss of biodiversity as well, and the risk of more pandemics, putting our existence as humankind in danger once more. Lastly, I'd like to ask the politicians and academics of the world a question. Can the Amazon be declared as intangible and living world heritage? And can we put a stop to the murdering, burning down and polluting of all the living beings in it? Is it possible to save this ecosystem from extinction? Of course it is. And to do so, it's urgent that we reevaluate and enable our communities to lead this process with you.
Okay, I hope you enjoy the film that we produced from our last trip to the Amazon, together with our colleagues from several indigenous communities and also our partner, Lombard Todier. And now in the next 25 minutes, I wanted to share a few reflections, but also some facts about the key role that our forests should play basically in transforming our world, in moving from the current linear and fossil-based economy towards a circular bioeconomy. But to start contextualizing the planetary relevance of our forest, I would like to start from the very beginning. And the issue is that before trees emerged and forests expanded in our planet more than 300 million years ago, the planet was quite different. And for instance, in terms of climate, it was 10 degrees Celsius warmer than it is today. And we had 10 times the CO2 concentrations of CO2 in the atmosphere that we have today. So when trees and forests expanded, they really transformed radically the climate of the planet. And this is because trees are rather good in using solar energy to transform CO2 into biomass and different ecosystem services, while releasing oxygen and water in a vapor format. And through such process, they could, at the planetary scale, cool the climate. In addition, our forests are very good also in working in symbiosis with different organisms, with plants, with animals. And since forests emerged and expanded in our planet, we could say that they became the backbone for life, for nature in the planet. So it's not surprising that the tree of life is an archetype that is repeated in many religions and many cultures in different parts of the world, from the Bible to the Upanishad in the Hindu tradition or in the Amazon cosmology. So we could say that once forests transform the planet and make it habitable for mammals first, then monkeys, and then humans. But now, in the era of the Anthropocene, when humans, for the first time ever, have managed to change the climate of the planet, and by the way, using the fossil resources that were already created 300 million years ago by the first forests that appeared in our Earth, and now our forests are called to play, again, a transformative role in making sure that the planet continues to be habitable for the future generations. This transformation is crucial because after relying for more than 150 years on a linear, extractive, and fossil-based economy, we have arrived at a tipping point. Our world, in many respects, is too big for our planet. And the multidimensional crisis that we are facing today, the climate, biodiversity, inequality, even the health crisis, are not different crises. They are just different consequences of the same fundamental problem, which is our economic system. A system, remember, that is addicted to fossil resources and to growth at all costs. A system that fails to value our most important capital and the basis for human health and well-being, which is nature. And having arrived to such tipping point, we clearly need to rethink our economy if we want to rewrite our future still on time. Albert Einstein used to say that we cannot solve our current problems with the same thinking we had when we created them. And this is exactly what we need now, a new way of thinking as basis for a new economic paradigm. A new economic paradigm where life, remember that bio means life, a new economic paradigm where life and not consumption becomes its true engine and purpose is what some of us call a circular bioeconomy, an economy that prospers in harmony with nature, but powered by nature. And this is not a contradiction, but a necessary condition, because a circular bioeconomy is above all an economy that restores harmony between humanity, nature, and the environment. So a circular bioeconomy, as you can see in this drawing, is a regenerative economy that restores natural capital while managing sustainably and holistically our biological systems in order to produce in a synergistic way food, energy, ecosystem services, and bio-based solutions to decarbonize our economy while generating new jobs and economic prosperity. But in order to succeed to develop a long-term resilient and circular bioeconomy, we need to recognize, value, and invest at least in 4 different strategic pillars or axes. The first one is biodiversity. Biodiversity is a prerequisite for life to adapt and evolve in a changing environment. Biodiversity is basically the insurance of life to change. And a bioeconomy is an economy relying on life and therefore needs to be powered ultimately by biodiversity. So investing in biodiversity is a priority investment for any long-term sustainable and resilient circular bioeconomy. The second pillar was already mentioned by Natalie before, is knowledge. A circular bioeconomy is more complex than a linear fossil economy because basically we are dealing with life, nature, biological systems which are complex and interdependent by nature. And therefore a circular bioeconomy by nature needs to be very knowledge intense, science-based, but also we need to capitalize, as Natalie mentioned before, on the knowledge of indigenous communities, of local communities that have been gathered for thousands of years. In fact, in many parts of the world, a circular bioeconomy will need to be based on a partnership between the scientific community and indigenous communities. And such knowledge needs to be transformed into sustainable and inclusive technologies, business models, and markets. But above all, it needs to be translated into wisdom, something that the indigenous communities know too well. Talking about wisdom, we move to the third pillar, which is circularity, is circular systems. Remember that biological resources, if managed sustainably and wisely, are renewable and circular by nature. We should also highlight that biological resources, even if they are renewable, they are not unlimited. And this is why they need to be used, protect, and transform using circular economy principles that can be summarized with the 4 R's: reduce consumption whenever we can, reuse, repair, and recycle. These are not new principles. Again, indigenous and local communities have been using them for thousands of years, and we were using them ourselves before the industrial era became the mainstream paradigm. And now these circular economy principles, they need to become mainstream in our economy. And the fourth pillar is the local and indigenous communities. They are the social fabric, the basic social fabric that needs to take care, protect, manage our renewable natural capital, which is the basis for a circular bioeconomy. Many actors, many stakeholders say that the circular bioeconomy is too naive, too costly compared to a linear fossil economy, and therefore it is difficult to be implemented. Of course, it depends what do you consider a cost or an investment. And it is true, as I was saying before, that a circular bioeconomy is more complex. Biological resources, the way they are distributed, owned, the way they need to be mobilized and managed and processed even compared to fossil resources, it is obvious that it is a more complex system to organize and to manage. But the other side of the coin is that because the way they are distributed and the way they need to manage and process, they allow us to distribute jobs, prosperity, wealth, infrastructures in much wider parts of the territory. And therefore, a circular bioeconomy is a very good strategy to address inequality issues and support inclusive prosperity. But now let's have a look to the importance of our forest in transitioning from a linear fossil economy towards a circular bioeconomy. As I was saying before, forests are the backbone for life in our planet. And this is not only because they cover 31% of the global land area, but basically our forests are the main host for life in the planet. World forests are hosting around 80% of the terrestrial biodiversity. But as we saw also before, our forests play a crucial role in supporting life beyond their own boundaries, because they are also our largest terrestrial carbon sink and the main terrestrial source for precipitation and oxygen. For instance, important shares of the rainfall in Uruguay, Paraguay, Argentina come directly from the Amazon forest, also in the southwest of the US. Important shares of the rainfall in China come from Siberian forest. The same happened in Africa with the Congo Basin forest. So without forest, there is no water, basically, and without water, there is no food. So forests are crucial for food security issues. But our forests also will play another fundamental role in the future, because forests are also the main source for non-food, non-feed, renewable biological resources. And the good news is that with emerging science and technology, we can transform such resources into a totally new range of innovative bio-based solutions that can replace and environmentally outperform fossil products and non-renewable materials from a number of industrial sectors: construction, textiles, transport, chemical sectors that will need to become circular and climate neutral in the next decades. So I want to show you 3 examples so that you can visualize the transformational potential of forest-based solutions. A very paradigmatic one is the building construction sector, a huge sector with huge economic implications, but also with great environmental impacts. For instance, in Europe, the use and construction of buildings, and at global level, the figures I will tell you are rather similar. So the use and construction of buildings represents about 35% of the carbon emissions, 40% of all the energy we are using in Europe, 50% of all the raw materials that we use, and 30% of all the waste. This is very much related to the fact that 2 materials that are dominating the sector have dominated the sector for more than 100 years: concrete and steel, whose production, by the way, represents more than 13% of the global carbon emissions. And now again, with the new technologies, we can produce a new range, a new generation of wood engineering products that can replace concrete and steel. And by doing so, we are avoiding a great number of emissions. For every ton of wood that we use, we are avoiding more than 2 tons of CO2 compared to concrete. But at the same time, for every cubic meter of wood that we are using in a building, we are storing a ton of CO2. So de facto, the use of wood in building construction can transform our cities into carbon storage infrastructures. Another paradigmatic, and by the way, using wood also, we can scale up the use of so-called industrial prefabrication methods, which are very important to make this building construction sector circular one, because it allows to produce all the assembly parts of the building in a factory, and then only the final assembly takes place on site. And this reduces a lot the pollution, the noise, the waste, and also increases the potential safety issues of the workers. Another paradigmatic example comes from the fashion industry. Again, a 2 trillion business sector, so very important economically, but with huge environmental impacts. It is estimated that between 4 to 8% of all the global carbon emissions are connected to the fashion industry. But the fashion industry is also responsible for 35% of all the microplastics that are going to the oceans. This is very much related because petroleum-based textiles are the main fabric that we are using. 65% of all the textile fibers are coming from petroleum products like polyester, which is a very carbon intense material. And in addition, results in these problems related to microplastics, which are damaging marine biodiversity and even our own health. The other main material that is being used today is cotton, which represents 25%. And even if cotton is a bio-based product, the way that it's produced nowadays, using many inputs in terms of fertilizers, pesticides, and water, also make it very unsustainable. And in addition, it competes for arable land with food production. So from one side, we need to rethink the way we produce cotton using regenerative agriculture approaches, agroforestry, organic approaches, but still the production of cotton cannot increase. It is already stagnated for several years. So we need alternatives for polyester, for synthetic fibers, and wood-based fibers using the latest technologies can be that alternative. Because if we use wood as a raw material for the fashion industry, we can reduce by 5 to 6 times the carbon footprint compared to polyester, half compared to cotton, considering how cotton is produced nowadays. But in addition, wood-based textile fibers are biodegradable, so they don't generate the problem of microplastics. Bamboo also can be used as a raw material in the same way as wood-based fibers. And technology is advancing very fast. Nowadays, a small startup in Finland developed a technology that mimics the way that the spiders are making the nets. So without using any chemicals, we can transform wood directly into textile fibers. But replacing fossil by bio-sustainable solutions is not the only challenge in the fashion industry, but also in all the other sectors. And look at this statistic here. Nowadays, the average person buys 60% more clothes than they did 15 years ago, but they are only keeping them as half as long as they used to. So we have a very big problem with consumption. Our society is addicted to consumption, and in fact, our economy is treating ourselves as consumers and not as citizens. So unless we address the issue of consumption, which also requires measuring the success of our economy with other indicators beyond GDP, which is at the end a measure of consumption and not of well-being, we will not be addressing the core of the problem. And the third example I wanted to show you is the fact that we can also transform wood into a revolutionary material called nanocellulose. Nanocellulose is 6 times lighter than steel, but 6 times more resistant. And the first car entirely made of nanocellulose was unveiled 3 years ago in Japan, a car whose structure is 50% lighter than a conventional car, and therefore could have huge implications for powering those cars. We can also produce batteries out of a component of wood called lignin, batteries that can replace the lithium batteries, which are also not sustainable. So with these examples, I wanted to show you that nowadays the new technologies and the investments in innovation allows to transform wood into a totally new range of innovative solutions. And I could provide you more examples from bioplastics, biomedicines, etc. So wood-based solutions can be the catalyst to radically transform many sectors, to make them circular and climate neutral in the future. But the key question, the defining question, I would say, for the future is how do we unlock such transformational potential while at the same time we secure that our forests continue delivering the important ecosystem services linked to biodiversity, water, carbon that they are provided and we will need to even increase in the coming decades at the same time. And of course, this requires not only maintaining the state and extent of existing forest, which requires stopping deforestation, which is destroying 10 million hectares every year globally. So it does not require only maintaining the existing forest, but enhancing and improving the health, the management of this forest and even creating more forests. So in particular, first of all, we need to protect the remaining primary forests that we have in the world, the so-called primary forest, which is around 33% of the total forest that we have. These primary forests are ancient forests, relatively undisturbed by humans. But there are humans living there. In fact, there are millions of indigenous people living in this primary forest. And this is something that should be considered. And in fact, if we secure the rights of those indigenous people and we protect indigenous people, we will be protecting our primary forests because they have been living in symbiosis with those forests. And in that sense, it's very important in the future to build a true partnership between scientific community and indigenous community to learn from these forests because they are treasures for the future in terms of biodiversity. They are forests of high ecological value, but do not forget also the important social value because they are the home of millions of people. In addition to protecting these primary forests, and many of them are already suffering from climate change, they are losing resilience, we also need to improve the health, resilience, and management of the so-called managed forest of the world. 60% of the current world forests are so-called semi-natural forests, forests managed with different degrees of intensity. And then about 7% of the current forest area are forest plantations. And these forest plantations, this 7%, provides as much wood as the other 60%. So they can also play an important role in that sense. But it is clear, and we see more and more the effects of climate change and natural disturbances on many of these forests. So we really need to urgently invest in adaptation, in enhanced biodiversity, which at the end of the day will make these forests resilient. These 67% of the existing forests are nowadays providing with 4 billion cubic meters of wood on an annual basis. Half of it goes more or less directly to low efficient energy uses, especially in the global south. So it is very important to have a strategic approach to how we manage this forest and for which purposes and for which products. Because depending on the products that we are getting out of this forest, we will be able to attract the necessary investments to invest back in biodiversity and make this forest resilient. And let me give you a little example to illustrate what I mean. European forest, the so-called, basically the EU forest, represent only 4% of the world forest, but they are responsible for 40% of the global forest products export value. So this means that with 4% of the world forest, Europe is really having a very important economic impact and implications in terms of supporting prosperity, jobs. And of course, this has been the result of long-term investments in forest management, innovation, and technologies. Some of the technologies that I mentioned before are coming from these investments. Africa harvests 50% more than the European Union does. But the value of the products that are generating with this 50% more are 17 times less than what Europe generates. Why this is happening? Because basically 90% of the wood that is harvested in Africa goes to low efficient energy uses. I am saying that because if we would manage to provide the right capacities, technologies, and develop the right value chains in many parts of the world, we will be generating more jobs, we will be mitigating climate change more efficiently because we will be able to replace many fossil products. And with that, we will be generating the necessary investment to invest back in biodiversity and better forest management. So it's not only about creating more forests, it's about managing better our forests and for the right purposes. In addition to what I have mentioned before, we need also to increase the forest area globally. And there is possibilities to increase it by at least 1 billion hectares in the coming decades. This also includes agroforestry systems as an important solution for regenerative farming, while also producing relevant ecosystem services. Many of the land restoration efforts of the past years and decades have failed because they have been very top-down. So unless we put the local communities, indigenous communities, at the center of these efforts, we will continue to fail. And I would like now to start summing up and providing some concluding remarks. The first one is that, unfortunately, in the recent years, many people, finance sector, corporate sector, many politicians tend to see our forest as a tool to compensate for a broken economic system, the so-called offsetting. While I believe that forests are a system to transform our economic system, not to compensate it. So it is crucial that in the future we develop the right insetting strategies with the right sectors, the right technologies, rather than offsetting tactics, because those value chains, developing the right value chains, will generate the necessary investments to manage and invest back in our forest. But these insetting strategies will again fail unless we put indigenous and local communities at the center. So all these new value chains, all these land restoration efforts, all the forest management practices that we need to put forward need to be co-designed and implemented together with the indigenous and local communities. Finally, in order to succeed in developing the circular bioeconomy, we need to overcome the dichotomies that the industrial era has created, the dichotomy between ecology and economy, between rural and urban, between technology and nature. At the end of the day, as I mentioned at the beginning, biodiversity needs to be seen as the main capital for a successful bioeconomy. But a bioeconomy is an opportunity to place biodiversity at the center of the finance, political, and economic agenda. If we do it right, the bioeconomy will generate the profits that we need to invest back in nature. This is why we call the circular bioeconomy an economy that prospers in harmony with nature, but powered by nature. Nowadays that we are living in a very carbocentric world, I would like also to emphasize that, in my opinion, we should not see the carbon sink as a target in terms of when we plant our forest, we manage our forest. I think the carbon sink should be seen as a consequence of doing the right things in our forest, including investing in biodiversity and in the right bioeconomy value chains and the local communities. Many things that I have said during the presentation, and you saw already the film, are being implemented on the ground through the Circular Bioeconomy Alliance, through a global network of living labs for nature and people. The Circular Bioeconomy Alliance was established by the Prince of Wales 2 years ago, and Natalie is a member. The Nature-Based Solutions Initiative is a member of the Circular Bioeconomy. We are trying to connect the dots between the finance sector, corporate sector that is aligned with our vision and believe that we need to move towards these insetting strategies and connect also with the local and indigenous communities. And I want to finish just with a final reflection that might sound contradictory to everything I have said before. A reflection that for me was very clear when I managed to have the privilege to spend time with the indigenous communities in the Amazon forest in Ecuador. And the reflection is the following. In the Western world, we are very good at creating solutions and fancy technologies to solve the problems that we are creating ourselves, including digital economy, which is now very fascinating for too many people. But again, these technologies are mainly created to solve the problems that we are creating. And I think we need to be wiser and not to create those problems in the first instance. So the reflection is that technology is not the ultimate solution. We are that solution, and we need to be wise enough to learn that we are the solution because we are part of nature, and nature is the ultimate sophistication that we have in the planet. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mark, for an incredibly clear and incredibly informative and very, as ever, inspiring keynote. I'm sure many of us have questions, but in the interest of time, we've been keeping Belen waiting a little while now, and she is online. So if we can invite Belen to the conversation now, that'd be wonderful. Thank you so much, Mark, and thanks for joining us, Belen. Over to you.
Belen from Ecuador, and I would like to remark and amplify what Mark already said. I have been working for the last 25 years in the tropical rainforest in the Amazon region, and it has been an honor to work close by the hands with indigenous peoples. So for me, it's very important to share this space with you, and I would like to perhaps mention something about the video Amazon Sacred Headwaters initiative video. So we work in that region. I work in that region with more than 30 indigenous peoples around Peru and Ecuador. The place we work in is a very vast region on more than 30 million hectares in the tropical rainforest. And nowadays, we have been able in the last 3 years to have a really clear commitment by the indigenous peoples to permanent protect this region in between the Amazon of Ecuador and the northern part of Peru. And they have been able to let the governments know that the plan of the indigenous people are basically to stop any kind of destruction in this area and go beyond extractivism, which means the open on mining, big scale and oil development in this area, and switch into a new economy based on the living forest, the protection of the living forest. And what I would like to also mention is that we are trying to have close conversations with the government of Ecuador and Peru to start this transitional pathway into a new economy that really is focused not in an economy based on destruction, but in an economy that is based on life on Earth. And that's why it's a priority now for the Sacred Headwaters Initiative and their partners and allies around the world. To us, it's very important, as Mark said, to give to have that opportunity to create new biocircular living labs, pilot projects in the forest that help not just the indigenous peoples in the forest to stop deforestation or to have or to improve their livelihoods, but also to give some answer, like macroeconomic answer to the governments of Ecuador and Peru to sustain another kind of possible economies. And the last days, the last 2 weeks, in Ecuador was a huge strike, a huge mobilization, and the government of Ecuador was listening to the indigenous peoples and having different requests. One of those requests definitely were about to stop the expansion on oil development and big scale mining development, deforestation into the tropical rainforest. And as a good news from that mobilization, from that strike, from that to have indigenous peoples on the front lines defend their territories, their life in the streets in the city of Quito, the government decided to stop two public policies that were focused on the expansion of the destruction in the Amazon. So this is a perfect moment for Ecuadorians to sit down in a table of negotiation with the Minister of Environment, with the President of Ecuador, and start designing a new prototype and a norm and a policy that will allow us to have more commitments as Amazonic countries to stop deforestation, to avoid degradation, and to start any project that will be giving us based on nature-based solutions, a step on what the next years will be a possible source of investment. So 3 years ago in the Climate Action Summit, Sacred Waters was submitted as a nature-based solutions at the UN Climate Week, and was acknowledged by UNDP as a one possible solution for the Amazon in Ecuador and Peru. And nowadays, the indigenous organizations from Peru and Ecuador had been having many discussions about what are the new sources of possibilities, compensations, and biocircular economies that will be allowed our countries to have more based and principles on nature-based solutions that includes indigenous people's participation. We do have safeguards on our REDS Plus policy in Ecuador and Peru. That means that any project that will be affecting in a good or bad way on the indigenous territories should be consulted and should have a free prior territories. And what we have been told by our partners, indigenous peoples for all over the region, is that they rather prefer going into nature-based solutions, pilot living labs for bioeconomy projects, instead of going into any other kind of development that is not following this vision that they have. And perhaps I would like to just add that what we have been told by our indigenous partners is that there is this big gap and separation in between the relation we have with nature, the relation we have with forests. And that's also a separation on our ethical side of the human beings that we are right now. So in order also to have this transitional pathway into a new model that sustains life on Earth, that protects permanently the tropical rainforest, we also need to understand and listen to the wisdom from our indigenous brothers and sisters. And basically what they are saying is that the forest and the nature is becoming like very sick, but it's also having a lot of resilience. And the earth, Gaia, is like asking us to do our best efforts to protect, in this case, the heart of the earth, which is the Amazon region, because it's related not just as a carbon sink, but as a biodiversity water source. And the wisdom of indigenous people will help the humanity also to understand about our dreams, deep dreams. So I'll stop there, and I'm really thankful for the bioeconomy, circular economy project, and what Mark Palahi said here. And this is Samaru, my son, that he's also from the Amazon region. His father is a Sapara indigenous leader, and we all are here for the Living Forest and the Sacred Headwaters Initiative. Thank you very much.